So we do quite a lot of work in terms of supporting community organisations take on the management of assets, and a lot of that around focusing on asset transfer. The transfer of assets currently owned by public bodies or local authorities into community ownership, taking advantage of legislation through the disposal consent, which enables authorities to transfer properties at less than their market value.
When we talk about assets, it can be what's really valuable in a community. So that could be a building, it could be a service, it could be people. But we particularly have a specialism on supporting groups in the community to take over buildings in order to make different use of them. So part of that may be running them differently, running them as a community enterprise, providing services from that building that meet the community's needs, all very much based on really, again, creating change in a community. But it can be quite tricky to know, if you're a community group, to know whether a building's viable, how to plan to make that enterprise successful in the long term. And so what we do is apply a practical range of tools and resources and support to support community groups to really think through and plan how to really make the use of the asset and make a difference in the community.
The thing about assets is that, well, buildings, is that if you want to take on a building, you have to be entrepreneurial about it, because the definition of an entrepreneur is somebody who sets out to do something before they control the resources to do it. So before they've actually got, it's not like they're, trustafarian or something, that they've got a great big pot of money that they can do it with. They have to make it work, it has to stack up. So assets and enterprise go hand in hand, of course. In order to have a building, you have to have an enterprise. You don't always need a building for a business, but often you will want at some point premises. So they go hand in hand, and what's special about locality is the way we use assets and enterprise for social action, for social justice, so to make a difference locally.
I quite often talk to groups that are right at the start of the process of taking on an asset. Sometimes that might be that they want to build an asset from scratch. Sometimes it might be that they want to actually transfer one away from the local authority into their own hands. And it can seem a very daunting prospect. And I think this is where a lot of community groups flounder right at the start. It just seems too big a project. So I usually advise them to sit down and talk through the whole project. And we go through the various stages, and we encourage them to take them step by step. The big issue really is planning properly and having a very organised approach. It's not quite as daunting as it seems.
Recently I've been doing a lot of work to support community organisations who are trying to save their libraries, which are at risk of closure due to local authority cuts and service transformation. So that's helping them to plan and develop project ideas and help them to understand what might be involved in terms of taking on and managing an asset, and make sure that they're aware of what that may entail in terms of legalities of transferring services, but also the practicalities of running a community facility like that. So helping them to understand the costs involved and to develop business plans and make sure that they're developing viable enterprises that are going to be sustainable.
The Community Rights Programme offers some funding linked to the thread called Community Ownership and Management of Assets, and that funding is called pre-feasibility funding, and it's designed to help groups build their capacity prior to them taking on an asset.
So it's about getting others to provide support, working out where that support needs to go, how it's delivered on time in the most appropriate way, quality driven all of the time. So at one level it's very much strategic lead. At the other level, of course, there's the hands-on work with groups on the ground. So at the moment I'm supporting, I'll choose an example of a group that I'm supporting locally that are trying to acquire an 8.5 hectare brownfield derelict site from a private sector owner, and it's practical work around supporting the business planning, looking at the financial modelling, trying to have negotiations with funders, with the planning authority. So it's sort of nuts and bolts stuff about actually physically moving that project forward.
Where there's quite a big learning opportunity for a group that's, when it's considering taking on the library, it's actually at a very early stage of learning about all the complexity involved in running a local authority contract, taking on the building, constituting itself, going through the process of establishing charity commission status, even though not employing staff, then employing and making use of volunteers. There's a lot for a group at an early stage to learn just about some of the basics of being constituted, around putting its constitution together in a way that gives it the opportunity to run a building, to enter into contracts if needs be, to take responsibility for staff or certainly for volunteers, and to have a broad vision of what it wants to achieve, not just in terms of running a library, but in terms of lifetime, long-term learning for the people of the area. So it's been quite a challenge and interesting to see that all through with a couple of groups in Buckinghamshire, particularly advising them on the detail of the state of the building when they're taking it on, what the liabilities they will have for managing and running, how they should take account of the long-term replacement of at least some of the softer materials, if not thinking about the longer term consequences of having to replace roofs and having painting done and maintenance and so on. And then all that in the context of taking on and running a library service, which requires statutory responsibilities, at least in terms of book issuing, in terms of meeting particular needs for information, in terms of running book sales, in terms also of looking at what the community needs are, perhaps a better use of the space, and looking at the different needs of different parts of the community. So there's a whole story for a group, not just in terms of mission and the vision, but also in terms of the actual deliverable and the actual longer term. How are we going to make a difference to this community, the younger people, the older people, the people who don't use the library in the particular case? I'm thinking of a village near High Wycombe. How do we market the services, and how can we get some income streams so that we can have a longer term future over the life of the lease that particular group's taken on from the County Council in Buckinghamshire. So it's a whole picture, it's a whole opportunity for getting engaged with a group, and it's a lovely opportunity to help people learn and understand and deliver.